Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanan.
In this world, you don't know answers. It's like extremely hypothetical. If you wait to have complete information, you've waited too long and you're going to lose. So it's a competency of being able to keep your together, knowing that it's chaotic and you might be wrong.
On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of.
Gmail, Amazon Prime, the Sony PlayStation. Some of the biggest bets and successes in the technology world didn't come from startups that Google or Amazon or Sony acquired. They came from intrapreneurs who built inside of these established companies. They came from people who saw something that the rest of the folks in the organization didn't necessarily see, who also had the conviction to turn that spark into a product that ultimately changed the business for the better. Our guest today is Scott Jones. Scott has made a career doing exactly that. He's built new lines of business at Lenovo, Hewlett Packard Enterprises, and a range of high-growth startups, including where he's at now, the VP of product at Realeyes, who are a computer vision company working with some of the world's most important consumer platforms around this difficult concept of identity that we'll get to talk about. In the conversation today, we unpack how Scott has a process to scale innovation inside organizations that weren't necessarily built for it, and what leaders like yourself can do to foster intrapreneurship as a repeatable strategy and something that can be part of your culture. Scott shares a clear, practical playbook on what kinds of people in your organization are going to thrive in these ambiguous roles, what traits to look for amongst your existing talent or maybe new hires you're making, and how to build rituals and ultimately a culture that makes space for new bets to emerge and to succeed to ultimately change the growth trajectory of your business. Something that I also particularly enjoyed about this episode is that we go a little bit deeper than most of the episodes here. Scott and I talk about how childhood experiences and maybe even unresolved trauma have shaped the way that both Scott and I operate. And we get to explore how self-awareness, mindfulness, and emotional regulation aren't just personal practices for ourselves, but they're leadership tools that help us stay creative and grounded, especially under pressure, and help us foster more engaged teams that trust us more. If you're a founder looking to build and scale more intentionally, a CEO trying to find your next growth lever, or even an investor looking for more upside inside your portfolio companies, this episode is likely for you. Here is my conversation with Scott Jones from Realeyes.
Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Welcome to the show. I've been excited about this conversation since the first time we chatted. And you've kind of described yourself, or you've been described as an intrapreneur. And I think that let's start with some definitions to get on the same playing field for everyone on what that means for you. And then let's go from there.
Cool. It's a funny word. It was spell check always stumbles on that. A lot of systems don't believe that word exists. So it's funny. I think it's helpful to take a step back and look at kind of not necessarily the root of that word, but maybe the origins, this notion of the entrepreneur, where I think definitions can be varying of that as well. But this idea of somebody who takes on risks to solve a problem, they see something they can value, they can bring, and beg, borrow, steal by the grace of whatever they commit to making that happen and finding that value, often at their own risk and peril. And I think that's generally how not the greatest definition, but one we can work with. And then this idea of the intrapreneur, to me represents that same sort of concept, this force of innovation. They are tasked with a passionate belief in a problem to be solved and seeing it all the way through. Um, they are often, in my case, kind of chartered with speed to market, validation of new opportunities, but you have very few resources. So we're here, we want to get there. You've got very little to do it, but we believe in you. Figure it out. That kind of deal. So very exciting, kind of like operating as a founder. If you're in a company where that's the case, which I am often, and I am now, where you've got a lot of room to move and deliver on that. So it's got very exciting entrepreneurial and founding kind of vibes, but you are not at risk of paying your mortgage. You are in the safety of a company that already exists. So you get the entrepreneurial chops you get to develop, you get all the excitement of doing new things, but you don't have premature gray hair because you're so scared about how you're going to survive. I think that's kind of the lens of it and the balance point for me on the excitement of it.
We'll dig into the role a little bit more, but I do want to touch on that kind of one aspect, or there's a neural wiring that I've had notions about that will tend to do better in this kind of a role where there isn't necessarily a clear pattern. You need to have some kind of a sequence or something you're working towards, but the sequence is probably not going to be linear. It's going to come fraught with just, you have a whole bunch of ideas, and then a bunch of those ideas are invalidated, I'll say, in the most objective term, not right or wrong. And you got to go through a bunch of those invalidations, I think, before you start to learn more, and then you get better ideas. It's not the needle in the haystack. I think the more you search in the haystack, the better of a haystack you get to search in, almost. And so those are kind of my meanderings. I haven't sat down and thought about it. And I'm curious if you have, around, for someone to do this kind of a role of entrepreneurship, um, what are some like brain wirings or patterns that you've noticed that help you out a lot?
This is a good one where I'm going to look at my cheat list I wrote, because you could probably generate a list of these attributes for hours. So I think that, like, the fundamental one, intellectual curiosity, like, you have to have a desire of, no one knows the answer to that. That sounds really interesting. I'd like to learn about that. That's intriguing to me. You have to have a desire to learn about the unknown, solve problems that haven't been solved, challenge yourself like that, because there are no clear answers and it's just a world of ambiguity. And if you're not comfortable with that, if you want to be told very canonical order, these are the steps, it's this, it's that, and then here's your paycheck every 2 weeks, like, it's not that. It's kind of a treasure map. You might have a vague idea of the X you're going after and where it might be, but you're over here and you can't even see what's between you. It's like, I want to get over there, but I don't even know. Growth mindset, this, which I think ties to intellectual curiosity. So you want to get better. You don't think, I'm done. It's kind of what we said before, like, oh, this event happened to me and now I'm on this trajectory. Are you just going to stay on that trajectory, or are you interested in changing your course? Do you have a desire to learn, kind of get beat down a bit, but come out on the other side, kind of the hero's journey of, it was really hard, I didn't know what was going to happen, but yeah, I came out on the other side and we won. It was awesome. Or we came out on the other side and we all agreed we learned a lot and it was awesome. A lot of people don't want to do that. I think you have to be really creative, I would argue. So creative hobbies, you like making stuff. It all distills down to a big insight I had from a friend of mine, that this work, you're an artist. You might not, a lot of people might not resonate with that. They might say, well, I'm not an artist, I work in an office or whatever. But this idea, it's all about your taste. It's all about your point of view. It's all about your feelings that you get from something and the feelings you want to create in other people. I think that's art. It's the same deal, because there's no right answers. So it's, given your objectives and what you're trying to achieve, what do you do and why, and when is it done? I think that's like an artist. Self-motivated, self-directed. You have to have this internal fire. No one's going to tell you what to do. They're just going to look to you to say it's not done yet, or you didn't say you didn't do what you said you were going to do. So you have to, and for me, it's a blessing and a curse, because you're hard on yourself. You're like, I'm not doing enough. I need to keep going. Shit, I haven't figured this out yet. You need that kind of voice, but at the same time, you need to give yourself grace. But you need to be pushing, because no one else is going to push. They're just going to look at you like, what are you doing, man? We want to get to the X. We're still over here. What's going on? Very organized. because it's chaotic, it's insane. You're constantly getting information, signals, whatever. People are asking you, what's going on? Where are we? Where's that thing? You have to constantly be able to manage a narrative of where you're at, where you're going next, and where you see this thing happening. Like, where are we landing this plane? And you need to be able to tell that story in writing, in conversation, to customers, to all these stakeholders all the time at the right layer of distillation for them. And that's hard for a lot of people. They can't handle it. You have to be extremely strategic. My boss has taken it to another level for me that I've never seen before. He'll say, what is the most important thing we could be doing right now? Uh, that's like a different level for me. I'm always thinking the what and the why, and constantly owning the evangelization of why we're doing this. But even like in this moment, this sprint today, these 8 hours, what are we doing and why? Because at like the iteration sort of cycles of like what I'm doing in AI, where shit changes every couple of hours. Like you have to be like that tactical often. So, and a
Uh-huh.
lot of people can't do that. They're like, well, I need to I plan my next year and this is the plan and we're sticking to it. It's like, that's not this job. I can keep going. You see, the list is forever.
There's a ton of places there that I wanna take that. Motivation's one, ambiguity is another, and let's maybe stick on ambiguity. I know that as a founder myself, working in a similar capacity at a startup previously, a lot of the time there's sort of a vague destination, maybe not even a destination, like a semblance of a problem that starts to emerge. And it's like, hey, go see if there's anything there, is the extent of direction that I've been given. And I imagine it's pretty similar for you. So it's something really ambiguous, kind of is what you're working on. How do you tend to get started?
Yeah, part of this could just be my neurodivergence and being very intuitive. A lot of people have extremely granular frameworks. Just go on LinkedIn, you'll see. I wrote a book about this. These are the canonical steps of product discovery. I made this framework. Take my course, whatever. I am more organic. I just kind of dive into the pool, for lack of a better analogy. It's things like research. So let's go to whoever told you, hey, figure it out. Be like, oh, cool. Tell me more. Like, give me a debrief, senior stakeholder who's saying this. Let me get some threads to pull based on your knowledge base. Like, where did this opportunity come from? What lens are you looking through? And just kind of rinse and repeat across a variety of subject matter experts. So, depending on what we're talking about, it could be my sales team, customer support, engineering, marketing, other C-level people. It could be external research, like looking at talking to customers of competitors, talking to others who are doing vaguely what we think we might want to do. Um, Consuming a lot of content, customer and process research, looking at similarities, just generally turning on a fire hose and just dousing myself with information such that I start to see pattern matching. I also conceptualize it a lot like I'm capturing clay and I'm starting to take this clay and make shapes out of it. It's an interesting analogy, but I often think this is like what my job is, where we start out and like what that clay is and the sort of resolution of what I'm making evolves over time. But the idea that at that very first conversation, the senior person says, we're here, we want to do this thing. Can you tell me, should we even do, is there a thing there? Come back and tell me. Like, let's make a plan. Let's do this. So at that point, I've just got raw clay and I'm starting to make something. And then I like vaguely make like a sculpture, a very simple like stick figure or somebody. It'd be like, guys, or team, I heard the opportunity. I heard what we were looking at. This is what I've learned. I see this thing here that I've made as kind of a basic version of where I could see us going. This is my opinion, and I just want to cross pollinate these ideas. What do you think? Do you see what I see? And essentially taking that back around robin of everyone I described. And that's kind of my approach to it. So this iterative thing of I establish this kind of network of knowledge or sources of information. It could be people I talk to. It could be content I consume. It could be any sort of ways that you can get that fire hose. And then iteratively, constantly, again, it could be on a cycle of weeks. It could be with throughout a day. It could be call to call as I'm updating this clay analogy and saying, well, this morning I saw that this stick figure was holding a sword. I was just on a call now where it looks like he should wear a hat too. So I'm going to put a little thing on a hat, and I've got this next customer discovery call coming up. Look at this thing. You told me about all your problems. This guy's got a sword and a hat. What do you think? Literally like that, constantly just cross-pollinating against these swim lanes of, do we think there's like a market for this? Do we think there's like addressable customers and not just like a whole ocean, but where I could start? Is there a real problem? Does it look like I could solve it for them? Does it seem feasible, like for my business to actually do this? This isn't something that violates the laws of physics that I'm signing up to do. It's like a real thing. Cool. And there's more to it. Again, you could have like a very complicated framework, but just to say, I do it more kind of this intuitive thing where I've got these swim lanes in my mind. I've got all this information and I'm trying to translate that into something where people can react to it. And that's something that people can react to evolves from clickable prototypes, drawings, just talking into an MVP, into a proof of concept, into a commercial product that doesn't solve everything, but does something. And it starts making money into evolving into this grand vision of this like self-supporting, beautiful, beautiful thing. Generally how I try to approach it. Again, not it's these exact steps every time. It's just more like I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly using my network.
When you're working around a team, like in your case, you work for founders who are going to kind of go work on other things, and you're taking off some of the problems from their hands. There's ultimately like you got to come back to home base and communicate the opportunities and what should be pursued in your opinion, what shouldn't, I imagine. So at that point, you got to structure these things so that others can better understand it, I imagine. What does that tend to look like?
It is culture specific. It ties to very much the personalities of who you're dealing with. I've never seen it the same. It depends on, so like the founders I work for now is a great example. I've never worked for people exactly like them. They are extremely analytical, extremely data driven, extremely strategic, and they are very good at placing bets. So my first quarter, it felt like I came in and they killed something that I saw as I came in, and I was like, that looks really great. I think I could totally sell against that. But they were ready to kill it because they had already placed a bet and they didn't see the signals that suggested they should keep going. So that was like my first kind of, oh, okay. So I get it. You guys are different from other leaders I've worked for where they don't operate like that. And then to see like the next bets we've placed where it's like, I've got data, you can never have complete information, but I've got data to kind of form an opinion here where I see that again, the swim lanes I was describing before, it looks like there's a market there. It looks like there's tangible first customers we could go after and broader market after that. A segment we could start with. Looks like there's a real problem we could solve and a way to solve it where we won't lose our shirt and we'll actually be in a really good position in a way no one else can do it. And just kind of saying, cool, that's how you guys make decisions. Cool, I can work with that. That's like the dance moves. So I'll just convey the information exactly through like how they like to operate. I've worked for other leaders where I'm shooting from the hip. Everything's the most important. What I told you yesterday is not what I'm telling you today. And I might even deny that I said it yesterday. I might say, you're crazy. I never said that. That is a place where this is going to be very challenging and you don't know how to communicate with them because it's always different. And they're probably going to be telling you what to do and saying, you're doing the wrong thing, do this. So it's like, all right. In this example, you have to earn their trust as an innovation person. So it's typically they're going to tell you what they want done. You're helping them with, I can help you do it differently. Let me show you how I manage these things, how I get through the past challenges you had of like projects stalling or not realizing their value or whatever. And then somewhere in the middle, there are reasonable people who are not exactly like the people I'm working for now and aren't just all over the place, kind of shooting from the hip. This is the most important. That's the most important. And for them, it just depends. So it could be confluence. It could be weekly meetings where I've tried this with the CEO of this ad tech company. Fundamentally, you're telling this story. This is where we're at. This is where I see us going next. And this is the broader vision of where I see us kind of landing this idea, keeping it real simple. I've told that story to him first in Jira. Like, here's the current sprint. Here's the next one. Here's the next one. When he looked at Jira, his eyes gloss over. The conversation was a train wreck. It's like, okay, that didn't work. Some people love Jira. I've worked at companies where, yeah, just show me in Jira. Don't do all this work. Didn't work for him. Next meeting, 2 weeks later, I distill it into Confluence and put things into tables. So a little more manual work for me. Um, Kind of worked better, not really. It was better. He could actually absorb it. So it's like, okay, so the next version, try again, another iteration on that. So I'll just say there is no silver bullet. I've found there is no one size fits all to do this as it relates to communicating information. You have to like everyone's puzzle pieces, every culture is. And if you don't adapt, you're probably going to get kicked out.
Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show.
One of the biggest benefits that we as a society get from generative AI, folks are chasing after a lot of use cases. And I think if you look at it from like a neurodivergent lens, we all like to process information at different levels of granularity. We like to make decisions based on a variety of factors and communicating between each other on the same set of data, right? Whether it's in Jira, whether it's in Confluence, whether you had a mock-up created, whether you created a video of what the future looks like, I think that might resonate to different people. And today it's not going to take a ton of work for you if you're going into, say, a boardroom and you got three different people that like to consume information three different ways, and you give them all three different sort of styles or mediums of the final output, all originating from the same idea or the same, call it business plan or whatever, the clay model. And I'm curious if you see things the same way or if you formed any opinions about that.
I had a call with a buddy, a former colleague who's building a startup, approaching the problem from a different direction. And the whole premise was this amazing podcast where this product leader was showing off how he used windsurf to go end to end on actually deploying code and new products. And he was saying, and look at this is really cool too. And I've only gotten halfway in this podcast, so this is really cool too. All my directories, all my file directories, and all my code is in Windsurf, but it's also in GitHub. And he like went over to GitHub and he started like, I think he wrote it like a prompt saying, make me a slide for an investor about where we're at and the progress to date. And I just did it. And like, hey, write me an email to my board or to my CEO about where we're at against goals. And it does it. It's like, we're like right there. So yeah. And my buddy I was talking about, he built a startup where you don't have to get in all the code and stuff. It's the premise is like put a widget in your environment and I'm being very hand wavy, natively syncs to all your content, all the stuff. And then you just write queries like that. Like, hey, for this project, can you create a slide that I can send to this guy telling our roadmap or where we're at against goals and like red, yellow, green and be like, yep, here it is. Like we're right there. It's pretty cool.
So in terms of for the companies out there that are looking to identify someone like yourself, I think they've been called strategic projects, intrapreneurs. If we target like a CEO archetype that's maybe kind of the middle of the bucket in terms of the three options you provided, maybe not quite as strategic as intentional as your current colleagues, and maybe not all the way on the other side where it's shooting from the hip and you're being very tactical. Folks in the middle who maybe are curious, they are open to this mode of going beyond the linear growth that they've been having and looking to find new markets or find sort of the next generation of products. What's some advice that you'd have for the CEO to create an environment where it's most likely to be successful?
Yeah, I think of a CEO who's wondering how do I bring this into my world? What does that even look like? Yeah, it's a culture. it's a cultural thing, I would say. It's a mindset. One of the more fun and I would argue easier ways to kind of get your little boat in the water and start sailing like this is to have hackathons. And I've seen that a lot, both at companies I work at and others where I've been invited to participate with my own technology to help them innovate. And the idea there being, let's create a ritual, let's say once a quarter. Some places do it like once a week. You don't have to do it that often, but let's say let's create a ritual here, a culture around innovation. Once a quarter, we're going to triage ideas, and then teams can form around ideas and say, yeah, we're passionate about this one, and these other four people are passionate about that one, and we'll time box how long you get to go after this, and then we have a demo day. And you can get, there's more nuance you can have on that, like all these ideas have to be tied to one of these strategic objectives, and it has to be a real thing we could actually ship and add value. You can get like real particular about it, but even just doing that, y'all are going to start operating differently, learning, and realizing, oh crap, we built this thing that we thought would take 6 months. We got a first version of this in a week, and it's actually pretty good. Look at that. And customers are like, that's going to start happening. It's easier than you think. Innovation lunch and learns is another one I've seen where because innovation is all about cross-pollinating ideas. Like it's actually that simple at like a really abstract level. You're only as smart as kind of groups of people interacting with something to refine that clay model. So the idea of, well, let's start cross-pollinating ideas. Let's be intentional. Let's have teams start presenting what they're working on, their challenges, new things they've tried. Let's have engineers talk about, this is a thing we built and we built it this way and it solves this problem, whatever, and get feedback from everyone else saying, oh, we could use that too. Or, hey, that reminds me of this other customer we have where that would be really interesting. Case studies on things that went well or not well. People showing off how they're using Gen AI, like everything like that, like just start cross-pollinating so people are out of their silos. Then you can start adding these as goals to teams. Like I was just talking to a VP of product a couple days ago in my area. He has a new design team that he just spun up. And he said, this quarter, you guys have a goal. You need to do 5 things where we're going from prototype to validation to deciding if we're launching it or not. And you're going to use these 5 different tools. I'm not saying it exactly like him. And coming out on the other side, we're going to know, hey, this process works or not. These are the tools, the pros and cons of each. And this is a basic workflow we can use to keep doing this in perpetuity. It's like that. You got to carve it out. You need to devote energy and time to it. So it's very easy for this stuff to be, yeah, we should totally do that. And I forgot about it because the business and my hair's on fire and, oh yeah, we were we'll do that next quarter. Like you need to own it and you need to commit to it. That's like, I think those are the fundamentals. You could probably keep going.
Well, and I think at some point, maybe it's a matter like the next step or milestone might be having someone like yourself, right? Who kind of is like the go-to for wrangling a lot of this like pseudo distraction from their day jobs work, but planting the seeds for like a very different future. And what are the kind of folks that you think tend to emerge that can do this well? Or what are some characteristics you think that looking back, you've noticed amongst your peers that do well on this kind of high ambiguity, high uncertainty team?
Yeah, it is that idea of intellectual curiosity, being comfortable and not knowing answers, because that's a fascinating dynamic that I guess I saw like a Marty Kagan article saying why MBAs are not necessarily great product managers, and one of the dynamics there was like they're not they want to kind of have a position in the ivory tower and be able to tell people what to do, but not necessarily to own the why of it. And if you can't go down into, so what is this opportunity? Like, well, I don't really know yet. We're going in this direction and I'm trying to validate. A lot of people can't handle that. Like, I need to look smart. I need to look like I know the answer. I'm not comfortable potentially being perceived as not having the answers. In this world, you don't know answers. It's like extremely hypothetical. If you wait to have complete information, you've waited too long and you're going to lose. So it's a competency of being able to keep your, no, I can't think of a better word than to swear, being able to keep your together, knowing that it's chaotic and you might be wrong, but you have a confidence and you're data driven and you can back up what you're saying. And again, as new information comes in, I'm updating that clay model to say, No, I told you that yesterday. Just learned this. This is my view on it. What do you think? Being comfortable with that. A lot of people can't handle that. Um, there's also being able to just push through it's not negativity necessarily, but this job can be very lonely, very isolating, depending on the environment you're in. Like where I was brought in as essentially a startup person to innovate at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and I was dispatched with like very challenging new ideas. And my job for several months was contacting people who could potentially be advocates, allies, partners who owned something I could use. And I would literally have calls 10 a day and say, hey, I'm new. I'm trying to solve these problems. We're trying to like innovate like this to create a cloud consumption business. This has never happened before. I'm trying to solve this problem. And you'll hear 10 times, that's impossible. Can never do that. That's ridiculous. But then they'll say, if you figure it out, tell me, because I would love to use that too. So it's that over and over and over until you find like the one glimmer of, it's impossible, but you should talk to Steve. And then you talk to Steve and he's like, yeah, we actually have something that would do that. It's for a different part of the business, but I think you could use it. Talk to Tony. And then you talk to Tony and you find the glimmer of light. Then you get told no 10 more times. And then you just keep going. It's like, that is the job. A lot of people can't handle that. Again, they want to just be like smooth sailing. You gave me my goals. I did my goals. Where's my bonus? It is not that. It's that entrepreneurial thing. Stuff's on fire. Things are broken.
As you're trudging through, um, both people maybe validating in that case the problem, like, yeah, that's a really big problem, and invalidating even your attempt at finding a solution. And then you start to see the glimmers, and then there's threads that you pull on. And at some point it feels like, hey, I think this is like, I'm gonna, maybe it's call a meeting or do something to kind of escalate this and say, hey, I think we should double down on the investment on this thread. What's the point at which you're doing that today? And um, how do you tend to, what are some of the things that to look out for to warrant the doubling down?
I think depending on the culture you're operating in, what I'm about to say works or not, but I tend to lean for what is the fastest way I can validate this. That could be fake it till you make it. That could be, I have a very simple version of a thing that tells the story and solves a problem directionally to a whole world of other problems, but it's enough, I think. And I want someone to validate that they would want to try this and then tell me if they'd want to pay for it. So I bias towards what's the fastest way I can get to that moment. What's the cheapest, fastest way? Always thinking, what's the fastest way to validate this and the least amount of spend and risk? So I'm constantly calculating, like, is there an opportunity for me? Like, we don't have much here. I've got a plan on how much bigger we can go, but I think I got enough here. Let me get that in front of customers and get them to respond to it. And so, like, very real example with Realeyes, 2 years ago, we got into the identity category. We were previously attention and emotion vision AI, but we had an opportunity with a top consumer app. They needed identity capabilities. We built them. We were wondering, all right, I've got these new capabilities. What other problems can I solve with it? We'd been running an ad testing business for a long time in the kind of online market research ecosystem where it's fraught with fraud. And we thought, I think there's something here. I think we could repurpose this to solve this problem in a compelling way. So very much eat your own dog food. We'd already been innovating on how to solve for this fraud in our own business. It's like, well, now I've got really powerful ways to do this. Spin up a simple demo of it, a point of view, 10 slides. We like put this together, put the demo together literally like a week. And the slides came together very quickly, some data collection, just start having conversations. And those conversations turned into validation. Yeah, it's a problem. You're right. The data you captured of the fraud, even on my platform, I don't want to admit it, but yeah, it's real. And then finding that right customer where those conditions are true and they want to take action. And they took this simple thing we built, they ran it as a proof of concept, and knowing like, oh God, it works, but it's not great. But they ran it in production and they're like, this is amazing. I want to have this exclusively. Like, wow, I didn't expect that. And well, I was figuring, do you need me to build like a better SDK, more purpose built for your business with more flexibility? And they said, no, what you built for this PLC is great. I'm going to use it in production. Like, really? Great. So you don't know. You don't know. And it very easily in a different culture, we could have gone down, I need to build this complicated thing. I know it's what they need. But instead, kind of almost coyly, almost like, oh God, I'm kind of embarrassed to have you use this. It's not as great as I want it to be, but try this out. I didn't obviously didn't say that to them, but try this out. And to have them come out on the other side say, "This is amazing. I want it exclusively, and I'm happy to use this in production. I don't need anything fancier than that." Like you would have known unless you'd gone there early.
Let's get into that use case a little bit because it's kind of fascinating given where things are with the internet and the level of and how much just like identity verification could really change a number of the problems that exist today, especially if it's adopted by some of the really big platforms. So, if you had to guess looking like 3 to 5 years out, um, let's assume that there's going to be like a decent amount of adoption of identity verification, which we're already starting to see. What what are some of the implications you think of like both problems and maybe or solutions and then maybe new problems that emerge?
It's extremely philosophical. I love this. I love this sort of domain of thinking because it's obviously very relevant to some of the innovation I'm doing. Um, and a lot of my understanding and the opportunities I see for us tie to it all ties back to this Gartner report that came out in 2023. We have an existing identity, it's called IDV, identity verification category, and is defined by the likes of Gartner as being predicated on three things. The first is the user shows a government ID, they show a selfie, and then this technology, well, there's maybe a lot in that third. This technology validates, is that a real US passport, for example? Does it belong to Scott Jones in Chapel Hill? Do I think the selfie is the same person? And then providing, it's called KYC, the Know Your Customer sort of package of risk assessment as to whether I might be a money launderer or a terrorist or whatever. That's the category. That's the only way they define it. But Gartner in 2023, Q4, when this came out, said that's the category, but it's dying. It's too much friction. It's too expensive. Just doing that, we see it at the airport now in the US, but all over the world, it's like very pervasive. Like in China, apparently, you're getting challenged to show your ID all the time. It takes multiple minutes. It costs $1 or more. These are not cheap. They are priced like very premium services. Um, and it's just not a fit for 90% of the world's use cases. But meanwhile, it's like very much fortified. Clear is going all in on it, for example, and they are trying their strategies. They're trying to essentially make it like your face, where we can tie it to a government ID in our system. I can link back and say, this is Scott. He's entering this concert venue because I've done face recognition and I tie it back to the government ID I have in Clear's system. Isn't that great? But then as well, they're being very clear that clear. They're being very transparent that they are kind of like a data management play. Like, yeah, I'm going to track all this stuff about you, give you access to the world with your face, but then I'm going to sell that data. I'm going to say, hey, I've got really interesting audience data on people who go to concerts and fly 5 times a week and go to these different restaurants or whatever. So they're very much looking to exploit the user, have very sensitive PII, and trying to manage kind of undergird every aspect of you as a human and have very sensitive data on you. The opportunity I'm going after is like the responsible AI version of that. Our systems that we've built for online fraud are anonymous. I'm using face embeddings, but I'm not storing images. I'm trying to solve for a world where it's too easy to be a bot. It's too easy to lie about who you are, like catfishing. It's like way too easy right now. You can go on a dating app and say, oh, I'm a 20-year-old woman. Like, okay, welcome. It's too easy to do that because no one wants to pay $1 every time to assure that you are who you say you are. And it's too easy to masquerade on multiple accounts concurrently, get kicked off, come back. There's a whole world where that problem is huge. And the building blocks I have can solve it and take it end to end. So one opportunity we're working on is I bought something and I want to fulfill that something in a physical place. My system can validate you're a human, you're unique, and you generally are who you say you are when you bought it. You're not a bot. And then as well, I could be called again to validate, now this person's picking it up. Is it the same person who bought it? And again, anonymously, I don't have to know who you are. It's just at the time of that transaction, I can tie all this together using face math. So that's like the world I want to create. I don't want to have like Big Brother tracking all of us. I just want to say like, I want to mitigate fraud. I don't think we should have to deal with all these bots. I don't think it should be easy to catfish people, but I don't need to know everything about you. So I'm pulling in the other direction. And we're going to have this kind of existential thing going on. To me, it's like very much like the streaming, cable to streaming, where, oh, I'm all in with cable. It's too expensive. Well, cool. Now there's all these streaming apps. Oh shit, it's too expensive. Gartner is seeing that everyone's going to try to spin up their own identity play that'll help you have your face as access to the world. So it's going to be like your bank. It's going to be payment apps. It's probably X is going to do this. Like everyone's going to have a play on it, and it's going to be a balancing act of who do you trust and what's the value exchange. And I'm pulling in the direction of I just want value to the consumer. You shouldn't have to deal with bots. Yeah, but I don't need to know like what you ate for breakfast or whatever.
And let me tie that like value to the customer piece back to the conversation we're having before around was that product ready or not? And in that case, I would argue that you were kind of negotiating with yourself, which is something we do where we launch later than maybe our customers wanted us to launch. And that's an amazing place to be because it means that you found that early adopter who doesn't care about the polish that you wanted to put on because the problem is just so big that they're happy to do the polish on your behalf because it gets them over something.
The business I'm building is extremely scrappy. It's like me and an engineer. I had a product manager for the first year, and she's been reorged. We don't have UX resources. We don't get to formally test. As we invented a consent framework to do what no one's ever done on the internet, where we're like positioning as a humanity check. The UX on that could be very provocative. Like, I don't know what's going to make someone want to feel like goodwill to use a system that's saying it's anonymous, but you've literally never seen anything like this in your life. We came up with like a first version, and we would kind of test it on our own and be like, I think I could make that better, and see, oh, yeah, participation rates got marginally better, but I'm not able to do it the right way. So it's very much the balancing act of your own embarrassment and shame, knowing I could make this better, but I don't want to wait because everyone says if you wait till it's pretty, you waited too long. And then knowing like in good faith, I know it's uncomfortable, but I'm going to learn really quickly if I get this out there. So you're like holding your breath, but it's what you have to do.
Makes perfect sense, and that's amazing you're able to do with a scrappy team. And I think like maybe also puts you at risk or a scrappy team at risk of doing the flip side, right? Where you're not negotiating with yourself, you're negotiating with the reality of maybe overselling, selling too soon about something. And I'm curious if that's backfired for you or if what you've got in place.
Yeah, I was trying to reflect to see if I had great examples of selling too soon where it's like, oh God, we shouldn't have done that. Generally, I think the philosophy is paid off of you got two worlds. In one world, I've worked at enterprises where what I'm about to say is true. In one world, I've got a plan. I'm going to launch this thing in a year and a half from now. I'm just going to start working, and we're going to figure it out and hit those timelines and negotiate it and whatever, figure out all the dependencies. But I've got like 18 months to figure it out. In the other world, it's like, I would love to have a business around this in 18 months, but I can't. I need to learn as quickly as possible. So I would argue like you just have to navigate that. In that first world, I've seen not necessarily selling too soon, but going with an idea too soon. And Hewlett Packard Enterprise is a really profound example of that, being extremely engineering driven. I was in the storage business, and the reason I was hired was I was not like them. I've not built my career in storage. Most of the personalities there have undergrad degree in computer science and a master's degree in computer science. Like you're studying the low level things about how storage works, like electrons and like how does data transfer? What's the most efficient way to do backups and recover? Like the leading edge of the science of that. So those people get real heady on, isn't it cool that we can do this? Look at this amazing thing I can do with this backup. And those say, we can do this. This is amazing. We should, therefore we should. Clearly people will want this. And then they start on that 18-month track, and somewhere in like the 6 month, 9 months, it percolates up to a call with sales showing your roadmap. And the sales team's like, why are you doing that? Did anyone tell you they want that? Like, no, but it's really cool. Look what we can do. Like I've seen it. So I've seen it like that, where it gets real far down the line because you haven't done actual discovery. You're just saying, oh, we should totally do this. It's the cool idea syndrome, where I've I think the mitigation and maybe why I haven't personally been burned by this is you need to have a plan. You need to like think it through. It's not just willy nilly. Oh, I'm going to launch this. I'm sure I'm right. We're just going to start selling this. So one example, probably the first time I really did this was I built a 0 to 1 foot traffic measurement product at an ad tech company, and the premise was, can I sell added value? Can I add on a measurement product to my ad tech hyperlocal campaigns where customers are like car manufacturers, retailers, et cetera, trying to target hyperlocal audiences and get them to go to very particular hyperlocal locations. Um, so was able to build a prototype of that with with a data scientist, and we got that prototype together in about like a month, such that I was able to tell the business, hey, I can do this now. We can start selling it. And I started to put together sales materials um, so that I can unlock selling this for the next 3 months, and then have essentially like build up this whole capability that I can start fulfilling it. Had I just said willy nilly, guys, we're ready, just start selling it, but I didn't put any like rails around it. Like I didn't think through like what's the best way to put myself on good footing with this and protect myself. It could have been a total train wreck. We could have pissed everyone off. We could have like totally bombed, but I was very intentional. So like thinking through, there's ways to frame it that benefit me and the customer on this new product. So one is data collection. Like I need a significant amount of data for me and for the customer, but for me mostly because I need time to actually build this thing so I can fulfill it. So we said it needs to be campaigns that are at least 3 months long and have this amount of impressions. So it can't be a little guy. It has to be a big one where for me, that means I've got enough time. It has to be these types of campaigns with these audiences and these sorts of use cases. We framed it a little bit more just to protect us. And that gave me the time such that I can start selling it. And then I start operationalizing it. I start actually fortifying the mechanics of the technology so that I don't do it by hand. I can make it, you hit a button and just figure all that out. So in that case, being very deliberate, there's risk here. I could totally bomb, but I've thought it through. And that's generally how I think you get around that. But if you just go out and be like, guys, we're smart, let's just start selling it. Yeah, I think you'll totally fall flat.
Yeah, and I think that not having the underlying kind of core assumption of the innovation actually figured out is a big part of it. Because I mean that what's core and what's polish is maybe the other question. And you can make something that looks like a time machine and sounds like a time machine, and everyone wants to time travel, but unless you're able to kind of figure out the underlying physics behind it, it's really kind of the question to ask yourself whether it's reasonable to be selling that yet, or whether it warrants more research. Of course, I mean, selling a time machine with no commitment validates the demand, maybe from a product discovery standpoint. You mentioned earlier, like the power of being like super hydrated. What does that mean?
I wonder. So you see this freak flag back here. That's very intentional. When people get to know me, we didn't have words for it like 20 years ago. Like now they'll say neurodivergent, for example. I'm kind of different. And I'll often tell people when they get to know me, like I'm kind of waving my freak flag over here. So a team I used to work for bought me a little freak flag.
I love that.
So my belief system, I'm not like a typical Westerner. I've gone down a lot of rabbit holes of like spiritual journeys. I'll just I don't know if I should like reveal all of it on this show and just go there, but just this idea that I don't totally believe this physical world is all that there is. I don't believe that we are just our bodies. And I believe our bodies are very much electrical systems, and water helps with the conductivity of it. So just with that as kind of the frame of it, and this happened when I went vegetarian too. My energetic sort of understanding of things changed. So by virtue of being hydrated, I have access to information. My intuition's stronger. I just have more flow. And that's true playing music. That's true on calls, doing technology. That's true with just my creativity in general. So I'm drinking more water than anyone I know. The only person I've heard of who might drink more than me was Tom Brady when he was playing.
Wow. And how much is that, you think, that
I'm not
you
quantifying it, but it's like, I go through 2 of these walking my dogs in the morning, more throughout the day, and then I balance it out with like cans. So it's a lot.
I think there's probably a whole other episode. There's a book called Shine, that the EOS folks have put on now, and it speaks to a lot of this, I don't know, non sort of conventional Western philosophy, in terms of stuff that's believed here. I grew up overseas. I grew up to Hindu parents, who have like pretty strong spiritual and religious practice, and so it wasn't so hard for me to jump on. But to watch this guy who was like this 6'5", like Western business leader talk about like the impact that childhood abuse has had on him and how it's a pro and a con and has made him who he is. And once he understood it better, he's able to wield it like a tool versus be surprised by it and stuff is it's it's a book that I found super useful, and it's not for everybody. It's and people say that about a lot of books, but this one I think is
Sure.
especially not for everybody. But I think the folks who it's for, just like things in the long tail, tend to go fairly deep. So
Super cool. Yeah, that all resonates with my own journey in an interesting way. So, like, in retrospect, realizing my parents' divorce really affected me. They ended up remarrying, which is fascinating. But when they split, I didn't. As like a 4-year-old, I didn't appreciate that. But now, in retrospect, realizing that caused kind of some challenges in me. So, and it led to like weight gain and issues with self-value and stuff, and that led to kind of a darkness in adolescence and picking up a lot of anxiety that carried through into my 20s, where a lot of us just assume it's normal to have this kind of narrative of fear, worry, and doubt, just projecting about past experiences and how that means this thing that you anticipate that you're worrying about is going to come true because you have a lot of empirical data. And most of us are just slaves to that. And we just assume that's how it is. But my journey through it started with studying psychic mediumship actually when I moved to LA. So I started studying to be a psychic. From there, got into meditation. Similar to what you shared about your parents, then I actually found my guru. So Paramahamsa Yogananda, started studying with him. He died in 1953, but he's my guru. Started studying with his collective, and now it's just this point of I would just really distill it down into I kind of conceptualize humans a lot like cell phones. We have really strong compute, we have good storage, we have really cool apps we can run, but we also have radios and there's a cloud. And depending on belief systems, we can debate what that cloud is. Is it the simulation? Is it God? Is it cosmic consciousness? Doesn't matter what it is, but we have access to it. And many times in our lives, we've been in connectivity with that and didn't realize it. And I would argue that's what a lot of people call the flow state in the West. And for me now, it's just this journey of constantly honoring that flow state. So I don't choose my words. I don't choose what I'm going to play. I just sit and I flow. And for me, the tell is my feelings, like in my chakras. Like right now, it's tingly right here. I don't even have to choose my words. I just know I'm riding the wave and letting what wants to come through come through. And if I don't have the flow, I'm trained now to know that whatever's in front of me is not for me. And it's deep stuff. It's super simple when you get to that point. And I know I was at a point in my development where I'd hear someone say stuff like this and be like, "That's bullshit." But now I know.
that's profound. My family was in a war when I was 6. And we got out safe, right? It was the Gulf War, Desert Storm in 1990, and it wasn't easy for sure. We got out safe, and for the longest time, the whole narrative about that for me was that, hey, we were in a war, but unlike a lot of people in the war, we got out safe. And the end. And looking back, the same thing. Like I was kind of like a skinny kid until then, and then that was no longer the case on the other side of the war. Literally, like those months that we were in there, and I remember kind of that same kind of like connection that you're talking about, that inner voice where I'm not listening to anyone else, where this like kind of fear or instinct kind of came up, where I'm like, hey, I'm trying to piece together as a 6-year-old, what are the implications of this? And like food seems to be a thing. Like all the grown-ups over here, and there were a whole bunch of families living at our house because we were in a relatively safer neighborhood. And so some of our, family and friends came to live at our place. And so there was a whole bunch of adults, and like canned food was everywhere. It's kind of like like COVID reminded me a lot of this same thing of like being unsure and sort
Mhm.
of going into bunker mode. And I remember as a kid just thinking like, I think we're gonna run out of food, so I'm gonna eat extra food now. And I had no idea how the body stores food or any of those things. But intuitively, I just kind of developed this kind of thing. And to this day, I've not only gone through ups and downs with gaining weight and struggling to, stay in a healthy state for myself and everything else. But if I'm in a pretty stressed out, like, situation, and that could be stress at work where I'm, up against a deadline and I don't have a clarity on what to do, or it could be as, doing something like playing golf, where I'm out here on a beautiful day and something's just not working and I'm starting to get stressed out. Just having like a granola bar or a protein bar in my golf bag and having like one bite of it just puts my whole system at ease. And it's something that I've, struggled with, is in terms of reaching to food for comfort. But once I'm aware of it, now I can, look for those triggers and be like, hey, is food the thing, or is there an underlying stress? And other times of like, hey, you're on a golf course in the middle of nowhere. You can't like stop and meditate for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, Now's the time to have the granola bar and use that as the way
Yeah.
to get out of this and get back into a regulated state. So yeah, it's really interesting how we downplay the things that happened when we were kids, because it seemed like it all kind of worked out, but the actual kind of impressions that it had on us are way more than we gave credit to until we start to unpack it.
Yeah, and it's very easy. I really love that story. Thank you for sharing that. It's very easy, and we all know these people where whatever we distill the stories we just told, event of some note and period of time where you kind of evolve from that, and then maybe get to look back and say, oh, that affected me. A lot of people don't ever have that look back. They just keep going. And they, depending on your belief system, they don't learn the lessons and they come back and do it again until they do learn the lessons. So we are arguably here to have that kind of learning and growth. And if we don't do the work, you just kind of stay static. And I would argue you wouldn't have, not to tie it all back to this conversation, but you wouldn't have a career like mine probably, because you'd probably just stay in your lane, just be like, well, this is who I am, and not evolve. The thing I wanted to note though, that was very powerful about like finding comfort in food. For me, it was definitely like medicating myself, just being like
Mhm.
binging. um,
Yeah.
but for me now, it's pranayama, it's breath work. So the fascinating thing, like you have a question we'll get to about like dealing with stress or just being a product manager, being an innovator, you're constantly getting told no, you're constantly getting, I call it like metaphorically punched in the face. And it's very easy, depending on your belief system, you're presented with this cup, it's got some water in it, it's like, well, it's half empty, I hate my life, I want to quit this job, everyone's telling me no. Or no, there's a glimmer of hope there, I think I'm going to keep going. And this idea that through meditation, and what my guru describes is, you learn to have this access to the real you, which is in this blissful state outside of this physical reality. The electricity that powers the light bulb of your body, if you will, that's the real you. Through meditation, you turn off the power of this conscious mind running locally on the cell phone of your humanity, and you get access to the flow, and you get to experience the real you in the background and realize like, oh my god, this is blissful, this is peaceful, I feel like I'm floating, I have access to everything. And through this regular practice, you realize that those don't have to be compartmentalized. It's not just when I'm on my chair or on my pad that I feel that, but you can bring that with you, and this is like your personal paradise you get to bring with you. And to your point, um we fall off the pedestal. It's like, oh shit, I don't feel great right now. For me, it's like the analogy of, I now know how to get sunlight into the room. It'll feel like, oh shit, the room's dark again. But now I remember, oh, I remember how to get in touch. So for me, it's like real simple pranayama, and I'll just like stay in touch with the connectivity throughout the day. So like in the West, we'll call it like box breathing. This idea, just give yourself a simple job. Hey, I'm going to breathe in and count to 10. I'm going to hold it for a count to 10. I'm going to breathe out for a count to 10 and clear my lungs and have no air in my lungs for a count to 10. I'm going to do that 5 times. And I guarantee you do that 5 times, you will not be stressed.
100%. And I think it's something that, as I started to develop a practice myself, realize that it's something you can invoke at any time. And I've experimented with listening to the same song while I meditate as well. And it's mundane, but it's also consistent. And sometimes, I wherever I am, I can kind of reach to a song that helps sort of bring me back into a more regulated state with more
Yeah.
clarity. Well, as we're wrapping up here, there's a few things that I like to ask all of the guests. In your case, I've got one that I ask all the musicians. I find folks that have had a music background to be some of my favorite sort of thought partners, favorite colleagues in the tech space. And I'm curious if you've noticed anything similar or if you've kind of made any guesses on the causality behind why music folks tend to do really well around building products or writing code.
Yeah, it definitely resonates with me. I've had similar thoughts. Few angles on it. So the first is something I've said already on this conversation, where this work is art, whether you believe it or not. I would die on that hill philosophically arguing that with anyone, where it's a matter of taste, point of view, feelings. It's all the same stuff. It's just through a different sort of instrument. And I say the same thing about like vibe coding. A buddy of mine was describing how I was using it and saying like, dude, you're playing it like an instrument. You're playing it like drums. It's the same deal. Like I have a vague sense of what I want to feel. What does this chord make me feel? Or I have a vague sense of what I want to feel with this interface or whatever. Here's a prompt. Did you make me? Oh yeah, that made me feel pretty good. Cool. I'm going to keep going. So I think it's that. Another huge part of being a musician is listening. That's the easiest thing to do is just get caught up in yourself and be like, oh man, I'm killing it. But then the band suffers. The audience doesn't get a great experience. One of my favorite books I read about this that opened me up to the world is a book called Effortless Mastery, where the author, Kenny Werner, this really amazing pianist and educator, he describes you're an audience member too. Don't listen to yourself, listen to the group. Don't have thoughts that start with like the letter I, that are like ego driven, because as soon as you do, you lose the flow. If you're in support of the greater good and you're listening, you don't even have to think. You just make choices intuitively that elevate everyone. And there too, like people love me as a drummer, people love drummers in general, because drummers make bands sound good. They make people sound good. So I'm trying to make people like, if you're playing your solo, I'm right there. Depending on the genre, my choices might be different, but I'm right there, like talking to you, supporting you, helping pull out interesting things, stimulating even. Like I was just like guitar players, they love drummers who are, I mean, in certain genres, guitar players love drummers who are interactive, where they can push them and I can start adding energy and more sound and more ideas and like kinetic sort of stuff to it to support you and help you really take off. Or alternatively, if you're in a zone where you're getting real low, I'm going to go there with you, and I'm going to be there with you, and I'm going to like feel it out. Same deal here. It's the exact same thing. It's being very supportive, very collaborative, um, trading ideas. It's all like conversation. I think it's all the same sort of skills. This ties into like what genre of music these people play and like how deep they've gotten, but I think it all ties in. Then there's also like statistics and math, which I've seen go in different directions with people who are technologists and musicians. So like one example I'll never forget, I'm really into improvisation. It's like my favorite thing. So I even have a band I lead where we get together in unique sort of soups of players on stage and we improvise. We have no plan. A very heady data scientist I worked with who's a trumpet player, he played in ska bands. I invited him to jam and he can't improvise. He needs to read. It's like, that's his brain. Extremely locked in, extremely quantitative and analytical, and he can't just flow. So, okay, I don't know what that's like, but that's his thing. So we're all different like that.
I was lucky when I was much younger earlier in my career. Someone gifted me the book Lynchpin by Seth Godin. And it's in there that he really describes this concept of or his definition or his borrowed definition of art. And, he talks about the difference between a chef who makes the menu and the cook who implements the menu. And the person who made the original of the painting, and then he talks about some specific area in China that's got like the best sort of, brushwork skills that are able to replicate like the Mona Lisa and everything else. and how the first person who did that had to do the really vulnerable thing. They didn't know if it was going to work or not. They had to put their emotion into it. They had to think about the audience, the emotion they wanted to invoke, and then everyone else is kind of like following the framework or the recipe book or whatever. And that's been a good check for me in terms of knowing, like, hey, did you make art today or were you a cook? And they're both needed, and there's no disparaging one or the other. I think in terms of like the days that I've felt the best leaving, if I'm able to overcome like the vulnerability, then the art days definitely kick the crap out of the painting days.
Super interesting framing of it. It ties into kind of the artist's journey. I would just say, as a musician, like you, part of the whole deal of the kind of path I'm on, where I'm constantly studying. So I'm like studying piano, drums, vocals, and I'm studying drums with like a very heady teacher in New York, where I'm intentionally getting like beaten up and challenged. Like, you can't do this yet. If you can do this, this will take you to the next level. And these like continual step functions. Part of the journey of becoming a musician is you get turned on by things other people do. So you'll hear it on a record, you'll see them live or whatever, or a teacher like mine will say, this is an idea from Vinnie Colaiuta, who's like really badass drummer who first made famous with Frank Zappa. And the idea that I'm trying to impersonate that idea so that I can actually do it. So figuring out the mechanics, the vibe, the technique required, and like the musicality to make it sound good. And I could stop there, because that's like, depending on what the idea is, that's like technically very cool. Like, oh, wow, you can replicate that idea Vinnie Colaiuta did on that record. That's really cool. Or you can keep going and say, well, what does this mean to me? How can I use it differently? This started like right hand lead and it went this way. What if I do left hand lead and I come back up? Or what if I orchestrate it completely differently? Or what if I take that idea and I like move it this way? So, oh wow, that ends up sounding like this idea from my other favorite drummer, Thomas Pridgen. That's crazy. So that's really that the root of that is this. So all to say, I think the impersonation is huge for our own journeys. Like, to be able to say, I don't know how to do that. I'd love to be able to do that. Oh, now I can do that. And I can choose, I can just replicate this and sound like Vinny, or I can take that and permutate it into making it sound like Scott. But the only way to get there is you have to learn it first. So it's like valuable, but it depends on what you do with it. If your job becomes, I'm just impersonating Vinnie Colaiuta, like replicating paintings, then it's probably not fun.
Yeah, I mean, depends on what your alternatives are, but I agree. The balance is probably somewhere between doing the vulnerable thing, but also doing the practice so that you can get a deeper level of understanding of how the artists before us came to writing the recipes there. You mentioned teaming and collaboration a lot, both in music as well as in product. I'm curious if you've got like a team that you really aspire to, or one that you find really inspiring, and try to kind of pull your own teams toward.
I will never forget this philosophy of a really amazing jazz guitarist, Pat Metheny. And it sounds unbelievable to hear him say it, but he will say in interviews, his desire is to be the worst member of the bands he forms. And this is like world-class genius guitar players. It's like, really? You really think that? But okay. So he surrounds himself with geniuses who elevate him. And it's kind of been my like guiding, I haven't really explicitly said I'm just going to work with geniuses, but just like I seek to be the worst person on the team, the dumbest person in the room, the most ignorant. So if you look at my resume, you'll see like I just keep jumping to things I've never done before, because it just makes you smarter. So all to say, I would love to be someone that Pat Metheny picks for his band, because he picks like some of the best drummers on earth. But as well, that just a philosophy. I always want to be on a team where we're all like, everyone's better than me and makes me better and challenges me.
And then the show is also not just about teaming, but also about building delightful products. And I'm curious, anything recently that you unboxed, or a service or an experience that you got to feel that just kind of totally delighted you, blew your socks off?
My wife is she opened my eyes up like 6 months ago to clothing rental.
Okay.
It's like a very saturated. Maybe it's not sad. I'll take that back. There's a lot of players for women offering clothing rental, and she's tied into one that's amazing. It's called like New Lily, and they exclusively offer brands from like Anthropology, and maybe another one, I don't know, but a certain sort of aesthetic vibe. Um, and just kind of looking over her shoulder as she would get to pick stuff she'd want to rent, it would show up, and they offer discounts on it, so you're never paying retail. There's like a retainer you pay that covers this clothing showing up. And I was wondering, that's really cool. Does such a thing exist for guys? So I like go to Perplexity and I start looking, and there's some lemons out there, but there was a cool one I checked out called Taylor, Taelor. I don't remember if it's .com or whatever, but I checked them out. I onboarded. My first stylist was a train wreck, and I gave them feedback on that. He just did not understand this kind of quirky technology musician guy. So the stuff I got 2 orders and they were horrible. And my feedback was like, this is terrible. And they said, we'd love to have you talk to our founders. So I talked to them and conveyed like that. I gave them ideas as a technologist on how I might approach things differently and whatever, just to try to say like, I'm a valuable person you should have feedback with. And one of the ideas was, hey, my wife's service, she gets to pick her stuff. She doesn't even need a stylist. Are you offering that for guys? And they said, not yet. It's on our roadmap. Would you like to test that for us when we're ready? It's all to say that it kind of brought me into the fold in a cool way. And they said, we're really sorry about your first experience. So to make it right, here's our head stylist. And so they gave me access to their top shelf stylist, and she like blew my mind. So months now of just like this shirt was one of her picks. I don't know if it's coming out on the, if you can see it in the illumination here, but this is like super cool linen idea. Very, very stylish, very cool. She like totally got me, sending me stuff that was mind blowing. My wife's like, you've got to stop buying this stuff. You don't need these clothes. But they're exceptional. And they're innovating that business model for guys. So clothing rental's a thing. You don't have to buy your clothes anymore.
Awesome. And Scott, for folks who want to follow up on this conversation, follow the stuff you put out, or get in touch with the Realeyes team, what are the best ways to do all of that?
On the social media platforms, I am found as Scott Jeezy, typically. So Scott, Jeezy, which I think will also be my frontman singing personality. Hold on to that. So that's true on LinkedIn and Instagram. On Instagram, I'm putting out a lot of creative content like drums, music in general. On LinkedIn, it's a lot of commentary about AI and innovation to meet great people like you. We met like a week ago. It's crazy. And for Realeyes, our website, Realeyes It, that's RealeyesIT.com. And we're all very accessible on LinkedIn as well.
Sweet. Well, hey, thank you so much for making the time. I loved the non-linear pattern of this conversation and the level of depth of thought that you've put into so many topics that I'm fascinated about. So thank you so much.
If you're talking to me, it's going to be nonlinear. So I'm glad you appreciate that. Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks for having me.
Cool.
Hope you all enjoyed that chat with Scott Jones from Realeyes. Before we wrap, I did want to highlight some of the takeaways, especially for folks looking for a field guide for fostering entrepreneurship in your organization so that you have more ideas, products, and what could be the best bets you place for your business in the upcoming years. Whether you're a founder, a CEO, a product leader, or an investor, I've thought of 5 reminders that can really help you with your strategic capability. The first one is around your team. Scott and I got to talk about this a little bit, and choosing the right folks to work on this is pretty important. I'd say pick a team that thrives in ambiguity. These aren't necessarily your best process followers, maybe the bad kids in class. They're instead the most curious, self-directed, and cross-functional thinkers. As we heard from Scott, they often come from maybe creative or non-linear backgrounds. And these are folks that don't wait for permission. They go looking for signal and tend to be resourceful in solving problems without needing to be spoon-fed the solutions or the process or the next steps by you. I would look for people who are comfortable with not knowing everything and still very motivated to learn. It's a hard balance. That's the core behavior. And One thing we do tend to do when helping our clients in Integral with building innovation teams or innovation labs in-house is we also look for self-selection. As a leader, I would be transparent in terms of the pros and cons of working in this type of environment, how it'll be different than working in the mothership's process, and look for hand raisers within your organization. Don't just focus on external hires for this. You may have some diamonds in your team. Now, you still need to interview them and evaluate them for fit, and not all hand raisers get chosen, but I've tended to find that the folks who self-select do tend to have a higher level of ownership over this experiment you're doing around entrepreneurship. And that also, I find, tends to come with more resourcefulness and resilience from the team members as those inevitable surprises and gotchas pop up. The second one is around the how. The first thing to remember, I would say here, is that progress matters a lot more than polish. In finding internal innovation or entrepreneurship, success means learning fast, even if that means pivoting or killing an idea, and sunk cost fallacy has no place here. Scott gave us a great example of launching a rough POC that ended up becoming a real product with production usage inside one of the world's biggest consumer platforms. Here's where a lot of organizations mess this up, in my opinion. They fund internal innovation exactly like how they fund core execution. As the author Steve Blank says, startups, and by extension, entrepreneurs, don't execute, they search. That means funding should be tied to validation, not confidence, and not precision. Check out our episode with Farhan Thaur, the head of engineering at Shopify, if you're curious to learn more ways or hear more stories on how to focus on learning rather than success that's measured using the wrong paradigm. Farhan has a ton of great stories on how Shopify does that at scale, despite the size of their team and the number of countries that they operate in. Number 3, why? You're not just playing around with new technology here and running POCs to understand generative AI. You're trying to disrupt your own business before someone else does. Scott's career from Lenovo to Realeyes is built around exactly that. And as we heard, when you already have customer relationships, trust, data, and a distribution channel, you're sitting on competitive advantages that most startups would kill for. Internal innovation or entrepreneurship is how you tap into that advantage and open new revenue streams and lines of business beyond what your core business is. And you may have heard the saying that the race here is between the startup finding a distribution channel for their innovation and an established company finding new innovations to put on their existing distribution channel. So fostering this culture of entrepreneurship can be the most sustainable way for you to continuously bring more points of value and ultimately more revenue and profit to the market that you serve. Number 4, what next or how to get started. If you're wondering how you take these ideas that you heard of and how you get started and what you do today or tomorrow, the good news is you don't need to launch a full-blown innovation lab on day one. There are simple, low-friction ways to start cultivating entrepreneurship right now. Scott mentioned too that any team can run right away. The first was quarterly hackathons that are tied to real strategic objectives at your company. And this isn't just open-ended brainstorming. This is having your teams build something in line of that vision that you can actually go out and test. Another thing is innovation lunch and learns, where teams share experiments, learnings, customer problems, or tools they're trying out so others can provide feedback or maybe learn themselves. I think these are both very solid, and I could add a few more. One of them is an exploration fund. Think of it as lightweight internal VC. Not millions of dollars, but a line item on the P&L reserved for ideas in the validation stage. You can maybe define tiers, maybe $5,000 for research, $20K for a prototype, $100K if it's worth launching a pilot. And the money here isn't the signal, the learning is. This is probably going to ruin your CFO's day when you bring it up with them. So if your budgeting tends to be tied directly to ROI in terms of dollars and not learning, that's definitely very important for running your core business and scaling it. But I'd say it also tends to fall apart when it comes to funding innovation. In my experience, I've had more trouble with companies funding innovation too much, believe it or not, than too little. And too much funding tends to add a ton of bloat and not enough urgency. It takes away a key constraint and thereby stifles creativity, in my opinion. It gives teams permission to avoid customer discovery often, and it usually adds unnecessary layers of management on an innovation team that's just not needed. Too much funding is a crutch that makes it hard. And if your team is asking for more innovation funding without discernible validation or learning that's being showed, that's also intentional and focused on the biggest assumptions and looking to harness your company's strengths, I do wonder whether you have the right people in charge. Another one I love running as something you can try right away is a time-boxed discovery sprint. This isn't a 6-month-long incubator. At Integral, we like doing these in 2 to 4 weeks, even 1 week sometimes. Pick a problem space or a market segment that matters to your business and assign a super small team, 2 to 3 people is plenty, to do things like doing intentional customer interviews, assumptions testing, and defining the riskiest part of the ideas. And the outcome here is clarity: to kill it, pivot it, or fund it. In other words, you go from investing that initial 2 weeks to then 0 more weeks if you kill it, maybe another 2 weeks if you pivot, or maybe like 6 weeks or a little bit more if you want to double down on the idea. Now, bear in mind, these timelines are further getting reduced every day with the use of generative AI in helping make these sprints more efficient. So if your teams can't come back with discernible learning in 2 weeks, I think it's really high time you drove that change. Another one that companies do is offering 10% time or 20% time. You've heard about this at Google. You need structure though. Without support and visibility, this kind of time gets absorbed into the core work. So I would add coaching, transparency and reporting, or internal demos, so side projects aren't invisible and people feel encouraged to ship experiments. And as leaders, I would make sure to attend these demos so you can connect the dots for them. And finally, it could be appointing someone who is in charge of these bets, like maybe a product director, an executive sponsor, or a special projects person, someone whose job is to scout the next market, champion internal founders, and make sure ideas don't just die in a Confluence doc. None of this has to wait for budget season either. These are cultural signals, and they're how you move from talking about innovation to making it part of your operating system, which is ultimately the goal. And lastly, number 5 is leadership. This is yourselves. This is where it all like lives or dies. Intrapreneurs don't need a roadmap. They do need belief, encouragement, alignment, and most importantly, I think air cover from the rest of the organization. Scott talked about leaders who ask about the most important thing we could be doing right now, not next quarter, not next year, right now. And this isn't just around driving urgency and focus as a leader. I think those leaders, the best ones, also facilitate ideation, problem solving, and decision making in the lens of a broader vision. So do your homework to identify where you want this company to be in the next 3 to 5 years. What problems do you want to solve for your customers? What customers do you want to be solving problems for? What change do you want to bring to the world within that time? And these constraints, while they may seem stifling to the ideas and innovation, do tend to be a way to reduce the number of misaligned ideas that your innovations team spits out, and actually, in my opinion, are a fuel for creativity rather than a stifle. As a leader, your job isn't to tell them what to build or how to build it. It's to hold space so they can build it and figure out how. And still have a job, even if the first version doesn't work. A bottom line, entrepreneurship isn't just a creative outlet. It's a growth strategy that can make a huge difference for your team. If you're willing to build the culture, the teams, and the systems that let it thrive, it can be really valuable for you. Thank you again to Scott Jones for giving us the playbook, sharing it so vulnerably, and sharing his time. And thank you for listening. We will be back next time with another episode about fostering engaged teams who ship the most delightful products. And we'll see you then. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.